Very good. And I'm sorry, I can't read your name.
Oh gosh, sorry about that. It's Melissa Gates.
Okay.
I'm the Northeast Regional Manager for the Surfrider Foundation, and thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak. I wasn't aware of it this evening.
So here, we all have to learn sometimes.
Yeah, and I am a lobbyist in New Hampshire now as well, so I'm going to disclose that too. So for folks who don't know, Surfrider is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of the world's oceans, waves, and beaches. We have about 140 youth clubs and chapters peppered across the coastal United States and the Great Lakes, and we have an awesome chapter right here in New Hampshire working to protect your 18 miles of beautiful coastline on the seacoast. Our members are beach users of all sorts. We're sea kayakers and sandcastle builders, surfers, and the like. What we have in common is a vision for healthy ocean and coastal ecosystems and motivation to volunteer to protect those resources. Here in New Hampshire, one of the things that we do is lead a statewide coalition to oppose the National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program. And that's to Representative Baldassaro. I'm going to butcher your last name, I'm sorry. But that's okay. All right, to your question, it's a federal program that operates on a 5-year schedule. And under the President Obama's administration, we had just completed a 5-year plan from 2017 to 2022. And when President Trump came into office, he announced in April of that year that he would be redoing that plan because of a whole host of reasons. And then in January 4th, 2018, an announcement came down that was the draft proposed program for that national program for all of our outer continental shelf, which is all the waters on coastal United States, off from our state waters and the federal waters. That proposal proposes opening 98% of our OCS lands, and I do have a visual for Representative Panasetti. I'm not saying it right. How do you say it?
Close, Panasetti.
Panasetti. Okay, cool. I will show you the lease area that we are concerned about here in New Hampshire.
Excuse me, Representative.
For the testimony and for the committee, could we get a chart?
Can you forward that to the committee?
I sure can.
I'd like to, because on the chart it shows depths.
Yep.
Okay, it shows currents.
This particular one doesn't, but what I can do is share with you a link to the Northeast Ocean Data Portal, which is a publicly accessible decision support tool.
And I think I'd like to get one so that when we go to executive session, we will have something that we can look at.
Yep.
I was just going to ask that.
I will follow up.
Yeah, so that when we discuss this and have that conversation, it would be good. I don't want to interrupt your testimony, but I do want to clarify something.
Sure.
You mentioned you were a lobbyist.
Yes.
I have to ask,
I
why no orange badge?
I don't know. I paid.
Are you a lobbyist?
Registered, and it's new. So
Are
it's
you a
because-
lobbyist for Surfrider?
Yes, the Surfrider Foundation.
Okay.
And so I
I'm
just
going to
completed-
note that you don't have the orange tag. Just
Okay.
okay.
Yeah, I sent the paperwork in about a month ago and haven't received anything back.
Okay.
So yeah, I just met the threshold to have to register this year because of a whole host of amazing coastal bills you all are working on.
Okay.
So I will follow up on that. I
just
feel
want to
left
clarify
out.
that for them.
I do. I like the orange. I'll work on that.
It would cost you the office.
It would. Yeah,
But it
yeah.
lets us know who we're speaking to, and that's the most important thing. But I do appreciate you disclosing it.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but yes,
Okay.
any information that you have as far as your testimony, as Representative Panasetti said, if you could send that to us, we will be executing this next week, next Wednesday. So the sooner we can get it, digest it, it'll be better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share links to the actual proposed program in its draft form, as well as the data portal that I was mentioning that does get at the depths and the lease area. And you can actually, and the data portal, because it's not part of my testimony officially, you can layer different types of data so that you can see, for example, the benthic environment or the ocean floor. And you can layer on top of that the lease areas, and then layer even on top of that migratory paths for the right whale, which is one of our critically endangered species that would be really threatened if this national federal program goes forward.
Representative Panasetti has a leg up on us because he's a Navy man and understands all that, so I
Oh, there's several Navy men in here. And women.
Right. Well, and perhaps it would be
We have a
of
Marine
note
too.
that the state of Maine,
there's a few Marines here, yeah.
and the state of Maine passed a similar resolution resolution to Representative Cushing's resolution last year, and it was championed by a Navy man, Representative McDevitt. So,
We're all over the place.
hey, cool. I also want to point out that any state action will have no lasting and definitive impact on the federal program. It is governed by a law called the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, or OXLA. And I'll share all the nitty gritty of this by email with you, so you have the links and whatnot for follow-up. But it is an important piece to understanding and putting in context what this House Joint Resolution number 2 will and will not do. And in addition, we're not speaking to the other bill, but there is another bill before the General Court that is Senator Fuller Clark's bill, SB 76, which is a little bit of a different beast, but getting at the same approach for New Hampshire to codify your opposition to this federal program and opening waters off from your coast up to like this really risky, threatening program. So what this would do, it wouldn't stop the program, it wouldn't remove you from the purview of the program whatsoever. But OXLA, the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, has 8 factors that the Secretary of the Department of Interior must consider when delineating where and where not to drill, and which lease areas to open up for drilling. And one of those 8 factors is considering a state's laws, goals, and policies. And that is why codifying the opposition that has been widespread across the state since this announcement on January 4th, 2018 is so critical to characterizing the opposition in a way that the Department of Interior Secretary, Acting Secretary Bernhardt now, will make the decision as to whether or not the northern planning area, which goes all the way from Maine down to New York, down to Delaware, or DC area. So whether or not to include this at all. So it wouldn't be New Hampshire, yes, Maine, no. It would be, do we include the North Atlantic planning area? It's, this lease sale or not. So part of that is the state saying, yes, we support this, no, we don't. And I can tell you that the only governor, because the governor is the vehicle by which the DOI, Department of Interior Secretary, goes through to determine the state's support or opposition to offshore drilling. The only governor who openly supported offshore drilling was Governor LePage, who is now living in Florida. And now we are 100% in New England. Our congressional delegation, our local leaders, our state officials saying, no way, no way. And like others have mentioned today, the Gulf of Maine operates like a washing machine in the basin. So any spill anywhere is a spill everywhere, and it would impact us dramatically. And to get to a couple of other questions before I mention one other thing that I actually prepared to say today. So I heard a question, and he's not present, so maybe he'll be back. I'll come back around to that, about what are the impacts to inland folks. And I got an answer for that too. And you, sir, had some questions about, I believe it was you. Oh, look at my... You couldn't read my name, I can't even read my own writing. So you said about energy, so what do we actually promote if not oil and gas? And I think a really important distinction to be made is that oil and gas is a finite resource, right? And the procurement of that finite resource from our outer continental shelf is a permanently devastating thing to do. This development would very likely see the extinction of the right whale, which has a ripple effect throughout the entire food chain. And the pile driving necessary, not pile driving, now I'm back to wind, talking energy, the seismic air gun blasting necessary for figuring out where those deposits of oil and gas are in the ocean floor, those are definite for marine species, many of them, and especially our critically endangered ones. Like even now, we understand that larvae are impacted and killed off. And as the ocean provides us with upwards of 70% of the oxygen we need to sustain all life on the planet, and I like to breathe, you like to breathe, we all, inland people like to breathe, yes. Yes, so when we mess with the ocean and we kill off the phytoplanktons there, and we kill off species in the ocean, we are actually putting ourselves at peril, and the entire planet at peril. And it also regulates our climate, right? The ocean helps regulate our climate. very, very big, important things that the ocean does for us. And so when we're looking at a finite source of energy compared to clean, renewable energy that we have in spades, that choice is pretty clear, I think. And that's why no to offshore drilling, no to new offshore drilling, and permanent devastation of our ecosystem and our air. And yes, to clean, renewable energy, even though there is no silver bullet for energy right now, and a lot of it is theoretical. Even the offshore wind, while we have these very difficult decisions in front of us, if we keep going the way we are going to kill life on the planet. And if we don't do something immediately, we are putting ourselves at great risk. But how fast and far we go with offshore wind without knowing the impacts, cumulative impacts, and how species might avoid an area, that's to be determined, and we don't know that yet. But I can tell you what we do know about oil and gas is that it is not the wave of the future. It is the way of the past that we know is a detriment to the environment, to human health, and to the marine environment, of course. So that's why I no to that, and yes to other energies. And so you weren't present, but I was going to again come back around to your question about what, you're not from the seacoast, why does this matter to you? And again, it's 70% of the oxygen we need to breathe and sustain life on the planet comes from the ocean. Probably more than that, that's an estimate. So, you like air in Grafton County, super important. And that's why really drilling anywhere is drilling everywhere. It truly is a global issue. It's not really a state issue, and it's not even a national issue. But where we have the opportunity to take action is here at the state level. And that is why Representative Cushing brought this forth, because of, again, getting back to how this decision is made on this federal program, is through the Secretary of the Department of Interior looking at these 8 factors under OXLA, and one of those 8 factors being the laws, goals, and policies of each state as told by the governor. And Governor Sununu has been wonderful in saying he opposes this, but that is not quite enough. This resolution codifies the state's opposition in a very clear and precise manner, and that is exactly what's needed at this time, to give a clear no to the federal administration.
Okay, I know we have some questions, and I want to make sure that the representative's questions were answered, but I do have one quick question, and I think you kind of stumbled on it when you were talking about the offshore drilling. You talked about offshore wind, and you mentioned the word pile driving. Yeah, I got it. So I just want to know is, we mentioned about what the offshore drilling, how that can affect the land and a ripple effect on it. So as an alternative, obviously offshore wind, whether we see it or not, would still be out there. Can you give us the effects of what the pile driving would be?
I can, but I want to preface it by saying,
Okay.
Really, it's not an either-or proposition that we're looking at here. It's not wind or offshore oil. And I pulled some stats when y'all were talking earlier and asking some great questions about what do we have capacity, like what are our resources? And I found that, and I'll send this to you by email too so you have the citations, but 100% of our Pacific and Atlantic reserves of oil would only provide 758 total days of our nation's energy needs for oil. That's it. And permanent devastation. And of course, advancing fossil fuels. And of course, all the other detriments and threats that we've already heard. And in the North Atlantic planning area and the mid, it's a very small amount that we know exists of oil. And at the 2016 usage and recent prices, the region contains only 4.2 billion barrels of oil, which, to put that in terms of what we need and what we use, it's only enough oil for our nation for 28 days. And that's, so a little bit of oil to perpetuate our dependence on fossil fuels for permanent devastation. Doesn't really equal out. And to get to the pile driving, that is a very big concern. And I will also say the Surfrider Foundation, we work across 5 initiative areas. Beach access, clean water, coastal preservation, which includes climate change, ocean protection, and plastic pollution mitigation. Our position on offshore wind is one of cautious optimism, right? Because we see that the decision before us right now as a nation is continue on as we are, which we know is not an option, we know that we are facing great peril if we do that as a world, as our biosphere. We know that perpetuating a dirty fuel industry of a finite resource that will permanently devastate our ecosystem is not the way forward. So we know what we don't want to do, right? So those things should be off the table. What we don't know yet are the cumulative impacts of large-scale wind farms. And the pile driving itself is a very noisy undertaking. It is deafening, but I will say also with the Vineyard Wind project that's currently moving forward off from Cape, there was a resolution that was just met with some environmental nonprofits and the project managers to only do the pile driving at specific times of year when it is known that the right whales will not be anywhere around. The issue with that, and Scott Cairns would be a great one to follow up with, he's a New England aquarium scientist who specializes in the right whale. He knows all the specifics of this. But the problem with that is that sound travels funky underwater, right? And so if we're trying to measure the impacts of pile driving or seismic air gun blasting, which is what happens with the offshore oil and gas, like an atomic bomb going off underwater, we can't really look at it in the same way that we'd look at sound on the land, because it just doesn't work the same way. And we can't really, with any amount of certainty, say how far and fast that sound under the water, where it's going to reach, and what it's going to do. We know in the immediate area that it will kill the larva, which is a big problem. We didn't know that until a few years ago, that this technology actually affects the larva. That's a big deal. And so, to your question specifically, to wrap up the wind thing.
I appreciate that.
There are technologies also underway right now to explore floating turbines, which don't require pile driving. Those are primarily looking out west because the ocean floor is not conducive to pile driving, and so they have a different setup, right? But some of those test betas are happening in Maine, or going to be, hopefully, if we can get it all moving along. And so that's one approach, but also I think there are mitigation strategies at play, that when you look at the trade-offs, destruction of the planet because we continue on using fossil fuels that we know are killing us and maybe pushing us into a cycle that we can't get out of, where we can't regulate our own climate, bad, right, generally, versus trying the wind energy and being cautious about how many concurrent farms we put out there and where we do it and how we monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of that and the impacts on the ocean, I think will be key.
Thank you. Representative Offshore?
The first thing, can you send us the, where you got this data? Because I'm interested in, on an oil company that'll spend millions of dollars for 28 days of fuel,
Right.
oil. And, but if you could do that, please, we would appreciate it. My question to you is on, would you support an amendment on this bill? Okay, and the reason I'm asking is because over the years, we protected the loons here in New Hampshire. Offshore windmills should be added in this. And the reason why, because we have so many birds being killed around the country with windmills. I remember being out in the desert from 29 pounds, seeing all them windmills, rusty ones, everything, but all the birds, all on the ground, dead. So, since we're doing this here on the oil, offshore, why wouldn't we want to amend? Would you agree?
I would not, and I'll tell you why.
For windmills?
A couple of reasons why. For one, it's a slight misnomer about offshore wind turbines that they operate exactly the same way as terrestrial turbines. There's also varying data sets on the impacts to migratory bats that live offshore and other migratory birds. But my primary objection to modifying this resolution in the way that you suggest is that this particular resolution is specific to the National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program. That does not include anything about wind. It is specific to oil and gas. So the entire purpose of this resolution is to codify the state of New Hampshire's opposition to being included in one specific program, because you don't want waters off from New Hampshire to be considered in the purview of this federal offshore drilling program. That's not going to actually remove you from the purview of the program, but it is going to give the Secretary of the DOI the data that he or she, by then, who knows, right now we have Acting Secretary David Bernhardt, so he will look at that. And so including other things like, fracking, LNG terminals, or offshore wind would not be appropriate.
Bell went off in my head when you said about killing life and was concerned.
Yeah, no, I hear you. That's a
No,
whole
that-
separate issue, though, and I
that's a
like the
good
way you're
point to make,
thinking
though.
of protecting, yeah.
Are there any other questions? Representative Agenda, did you have a question? I thought I.
No, Madam Chair.
Okay. If there are no other questions, thank you so much for your testimony. I truly
Thank you.
appreciate it. Yeah,